Bankruptcy is expensive AF.
For many consumers, bankruptcy is out of reach entirely. The idea that they would ever be able to come up with the money in order to pay for a lawyer either for Chapter 7 or for Chapter 13 is not a realistic possibility.
Commercials like this one are aimed at the financially perilous looking for a way out. But with the evolution of bankruptcy law, how much of a new beginning does bankruptcy actually give people?
I had to file bankruptcy twice. I was like, I have to file bankruptcy on my bankruptcy. Who does that? So I just felt like a failure.
Hey fam, I'm Imayan, and this Sunday we're exploring the complicated history of personal bankruptcy law and how it affects how lawyers get paid.
That's about as painful as a bankrupt gets.
Pat Sajak is wrong. Bankruptcy can and often does get much worse. On Wheel of Fortune, bankruptcy is just a part of the puzzle's game of chance. In reality, bankruptcy is a tool for survival for those who owe debt and are unable to repay it. And the IRL Wheel of Fortune can cause bankruptcy with something as mundane as unpaid parking tickets.
I felt like I was stuck between a rock and a hard place. Whenever you have to do something that drastic as with filing bankruptcy, I just felt like, why me? Why am I in this situation? It makes you feel like you're not good enough.
Rachel White was a full-time dental assistant getting only part-time hours when she filed for bankruptcy in 2016. The mother of two now teenage boys was making only $12 an hour, and she'd accumulated about $1,500 in parking penalties since 2015. Penalties she didn't even know she was getting.
They won't have the signs where you can see them visually, throughout the street. So I would park and I wouldn't see any signs necessarily, and I would end up getting a ticket.
The citations were being sent to an address where her car was registered, but where she no longer lived. White thought bankruptcy was her best option to stay afloat and keep her car, which she used for freelance gigs like driving for Uber.
When I initially filed bankruptcy, I had like tunnel vision. The only thing that I was concerned about is keeping what I had. I didn't really have the means to just go get another car at that time, and I was drowning and I was just trying to stay afloat.
White knew where she'd go to get help.
Debt stoppers, that song just kept running over and over and over again in my head.
She'd heard commercials for a self-described debt relief agency based in Chicago called Debt Stoppers. She'd heard their radio ads and seen their television pitches like this one.
Debt Stoppers is one of the nation's leading bankruptcy law firms. We've helped thousands of families stop foreclosure, repossession, and wage garnishment.
An initial $350 filing fee got Debt Stoppers to work with White. They found her counsel, and she had to pay a separate fee to that lawyer. Her bankruptcy case made her one of the thousands in the U.S. who've gone through the process of looking to discharge debt, aka be released of personal liability of debt to creditors. In 2016, more than 750,000 people filed for bankruptcy. That's the equivalent of about 28% of Chicago's population. That stat includes all bankruptcy filings like Chapter 7, 11, 12, and 13. Bankruptcy law expert Megan McDermott says there are only two options available to someone overwhelmed by consumer debt. You either file for Chapter 7 or Chapter 13.
So there are a couple of important differences. Chapter 7 is a relatively quick, inexpensive, and streamlined proceeding to a discharge. Usually from start to finish, a Chapter 7 bankruptcy typically takes at most 6 months, assuming it's a relatively straightforward case. Chapter 13 is a more expensive and more time-consuming process. The debtor is basically pledging to pay a certain portion of their future wages over a 3 to 5 year period in order to pay off their existing creditors.
The difference is important because the type of bankruptcy you choose matters, and Congress has had a big impact on which is most accessible to you. Bankruptcy law's very long history in the U.S. began when the flag only had 45 stars. The first bankruptcy law became permanent in 1898. That National Bankruptcy Act was the basis of the law for the next 40 years. It was amended during the next several decades, including important changes during the period that gave us disco dancing like this.
In 1978, when the code was enacted, I think it did a fabulous job of providing to very good options for consumers in different situations. But since then, Congress and the courts have really scaled back the protections that are available to ordinary consumers. And I think it is fair to say that it does not provide the same relief that it did 40 years ago.
Let's use student loans as an example. Before 1978, you could discharge all student loans through bankruptcy. After that year, you couldn't eliminate government student loans. Then, in 2005, new regulations meant you also couldn't get rid of private student debt via bankruptcy, which is why some of you know Sally Mae so well. Congress tried to move more people away from Chapter 7, where all the eligible debt is discharged, to Chapter 13, where you're on a years-long payment plan. The progression has impacted some of the most financially vulnerable people.
Those protections are not available potentially to the people who need them the most, which is very low income debtors. Congress basically made certain types of debtors ineligible for the quick and easy relief under Chapter 7, and also took out some protections that made it easy for low income individuals to file for Chapter 7 bankruptcy.
Legal changes haven't only affected debtors like White, who filed for Chapter 13 bankruptcy a second time in October 2017 because she couldn't afford to keep up with the payment plan.
Bankruptcy lawyers' incentives have changed significantly since 1978. Basically, when Congress initially created the code, they put a provision in place that debtors' attorneys would be able to collect. But in 1994, Congress removed that explicit language.
Sometimes attorneys have added language to bankruptcy plans that says they must be paid before any outstanding debt. So basically, you could be paying a bankruptcy plan for years that really only pays off your attorney, your court costs, and yet almost none of the original debt that forced you into bankruptcy in the first place, like in this very real-life example.
A man owed about $5,000 to the city of Chicago in parking tickets, and he filed for bankruptcy, and he proposed a plan in which he would pay $4,300 over the course of 3 years. And $4,000 of those dollars were going to pay his lawyer, and the remaining balance went to pay administrative expenses. And so you see these situations where the client is going into Chapter 13, and the only one benefiting from this extra time and obviously extra judicial effort as well is the lawyer.
Critics worry lawyers may steer clients to the much more expensive and lengthy Chapter 13 process, even when Chapter 7 is in their best interest. But others say what the lawyers are really doing when they pay themselves first is making sure their clients have representation for the duration of their bankruptcy plan, having a lawyer on retainer. White says she only remembers being responsible for debt stoppers and her lawyers' upfront fees during her first bankruptcy, and she's unsure if her payment plan included payouts to her attorneys. We called debt stoppers a few times to talk about their payment process, but they didn't return our phone calls. When White filed a second time, she got new representation and gave up the car she tried so desperately to hold on to during her first bankruptcy.
To be in a situation where a parking ticket or a moving violation dictates your livelihood, it's mind-blowing. I sit back and think, I'm losing everything over parking tickets.
These days, White relies on public transportation to get around. The bankruptcy process isn't one White wants to go through again, but the woman juggling multiple part-time jobs is not sure she'll be able to avoid it. Despite those odds, she's still hopeful about her financial future.
My life is not going to be dictated by debt and bankruptcies, and I'm just ready to move forward and just keep living. Work it!
Hey guys, don't forget to like, share, and follow. I want to send a huge shout out to Melissa Sanchez of ProPublica, who helped connect me with Rachel White. And what I want to know is if you've ever struggled financially. Tell us your personal stories in the comments, what you want us to cover next, and come back next Sunday for another great episode of Because Facts. See you then.